Good evening. We will be getting started shortly. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please drop us a note in the comment box and let us know where in the world you are, where you're dialing in from. We'd love to hear from you. Hi, how are
I'm
you?
good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Um, so excited about this conversation. Hold on, let me get Dorian on.
Not a problem. I'm here.
All right. The gang is all here. Hey, Dorian. Hey, Alan. How
Hey,
are you both?
Hey, Dory.
doing so well. Happy National Voter Registration Day.
Thank
Yes,
you. Thank you. We are happy to be here. Happy to
yes.
celebrate.
And look, Alan, I know you are living and breathing it. I just saw an email from you to all the partners across the country. So I know you're working hard, brother, and just want to thank you for your efforts.
I'm appreciated, and I just love the work that everyone is doing to get people to register to vote. Definitely
Yeah.
needed.
Well,
So thank
yeah,
you again for the invitation and
of
opportunity.
course. Well, it is so important, and I just want to welcome everyone who is joining us. Definitely feel free to drop us a note in the comment section. Let us know where you are tuning in from. And really, we want to hear from you. So today, as we alluded earlier in the conversation, is National Voter Registration Day. And we really want to talk about how you how your friends, how your family, how your community can reclaim your vote. Look, we know Black and brown voters are too powerful to be silenced. They're too important to be left out and too influential to be ignored. So here at the National Urban League, we are focused on reclaiming our vote, whether it's a national election cycle, whether it's a local election cycle. It doesn't matter. We recognize it's so important to really create this culture of civic engagement. So for those of you who have not tuned in before, I'm Jerica Richardson. I'm the Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the National Urban League. But I am joined by two powerful men who live and breathe this work every single day. First, we have Alan Blackwell, who wears two hats. He is program director at Nonprofit Vote, and he's project director for National Voter Registration Day. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
And then we also have Dorian Blythers, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Black Men Vote. Both of these organizations have been strong partners of the League in our movement, and so we're just so glad to have you both on. Dorian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. We're excited to be here, partner with you all today.
So before we dive all the way in, I do want to kind of open up and ask you both your why. Why have you committed yourself, your time, and your efforts really to doing this work to promote civic engagement, civic education, registration for those across communities? If there's a personal story, we love to hear it, but so often people meet organizers and come into contact with them. But I think it's so important to know what's the motivating factor. So, Dorian, I'll start out with you, and then Alan, turn it over to you.
Great. Well, I'm excited to answer this question in part because voter registration was actually the very first job that I had. Back in 2004, during the presidential election season, I was hired to register voters at Centennial Olympic Park in my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia. I remember being at a Kanye West concert back in '04. It was during the college dropout days, and there I was with my twin brother and our clipboards, literally walking up to folks asking if they were registered to vote or if they'd like to register to vote there on site. So there's a personal story there. I love the opportunity to tell that story in particular because it's about meeting people where they are. It was a job where, we were connected to both the culture and civic engagement. And
Dorian, we lost your sound for a second, sir.
Did you lose me?
We hear you now.
Good. So I was just saying, over a decade later, almost 2 decades later, it's so important for us to continue to meet people where they are, especially in our existing landscape around voter registration, misinformation, and disinformation. We trust our people, and us as leaders in this space have an opportunity to really set the tone and stage for what happens going forward in our elections and beyond.
I love that. And you brought me back to 2004. I mean, that was such a great album. I think you're dating and aging us on this call. Talking about college dropout. But I love that you were with your brother and doing the work. And one of the points that you brought up, trust. I think that is really important. So often when we're having conversations with people in our community, there are a lot of folks that are cynical about the electoral process, and rightly so, because of some of the misinformation and the voter suppression and changes in legislation that we've seen. But that's why it's so important to have you and Alan doing this work, because we need trusted messengers, folks that get it, folks from our community that care and really understand the impact. So Alan, I'm kicking it over to you. Tell us your why and really what's motivated you to do this work.
So I would probably give more credit to the youth of Baltimore City than I would give myself. And I would say that because I was a high school teacher who really heard dissent in the voices of the young people I worked with. I really heard that they weren't motivated and connected. And I felt that if I wanted to see change, I had to be change. So the first moment I had in voter registration was really just getting young people, many of them my former students, involved in voter registration. Like, how do you register to vote? How do you take that and influence and impact your peers? And then from there, that led me into how can I impact at a greater scale? And I was an election judge, then I moved to a chief election judge, and just was an advocate for getting more of us involved, right? How do you, not only to the message of trust, but how do you build that trust and that consistency and be that model? And that led me to National Voter Registration Day, where it was an opportunity really to bring together a lot of great partners who are doing this work in the community and find one banner we can all stand under that aligns with not just us as individuals, but as a collective. And this has been a very influential moment because I'm getting to see all the work that's happening across the country. I think quite often, and I'll speak for myself, I felt like I was in a silo fighting a battle by myself, right? I just wanted my community to be better, and I was just taking it all on myself. And then coming together with great organizations like the National Urban League, Black Men Vote, and just people who are doing the work, this gave me an opportunity to see that work firsthand and be a part of that change. So for me, it's not only, I guess initially, taking on the role to support my youth and the people I work with, but now creating forums and lanes for us to move into and control and be able to speak directly to the community, to be reflected in that. And then also when we share out to the greater community, the great work that's happening within our community so that we can empower and impact more people. So I find this is a unique opportunity to really make substantial change and just doing one part of the many parts of change in our community, which is the first piece is registering people to vote, but then, helping to support other organizations that move them into the voting booth. And then even after that, what do they do? How do they become influential in their community? So I consider myself to just be an advocate and a fighter and creating space for other advocates and fighters to fight, right? Like the key in this, I've always believed is when you crack the door, leave the door open for others to come in and do some change too. And I use that as my litmus on the work that I do is how many people can I bring into the room and create space for them to do it their way. And I've seen that happen over the last year, and it's been phenomenal.
Well, thank you for that. And I also think it's important to talk about the impact. So, Alan, I'm going to come back to you because I want you to talk a little bit more about National Voter Registration Day. It's been around since 2012. Do I got that right?
Correct.
And so what has been the impact that you've seen thus far, and really why was the day created?
So it's a nonpartisan holiday. It's really a celebration of democracy, right? It's getting people involved in their civil engagement, right? And it's starting, and I'm gonna highlight on the college campuses in particular, right? Because this year we're really doing a lot of great work with young people on college campuses and really trying to highlight the work that they're doing, right? They're committed to the work. They're already doing the work, and what we do is give them the tools so that they can do the work successfully. So my role at National Voter Registration Day is making sure that those who are doing the work, they receive the tools to make sure that their work is successful. It's either through our posters, our stickers, our social media, and webinar information that we share with partners, and even to a point of like individuals who are just registering maybe 5 or 10 people in their community, giving them the tools to be able to do that effectively without having to come out of their own pocket to make that change, right? We can help substitute some of those financial issues that people have and make sure that they have a forum to like and space to push that forward. And we've seen some really great work, and I'm just gonna say like in New York, where you have the scale from college level, high school, all the way up to in the community directly dealing with people, right? It's just like, how do you build spaces? And what I'm loving about National Voter Registration Day in particular is it's not one way to do it. It's how do you do it? How do you register people? And then how can I support you in that work? And that's what I want to be a part of is let people speak in their language, let people build in their community and give them the tools so that they can do it successfully versus telling them what they need to do or how to do it.
I love that. So you're giving breathing room for authenticity, right? Which is so necessary when we want to connect with voters. One of the points that resonated with me and actually made me think about Dorian, and well, there's also a lot of activity in the chat, pumping strength in numbers. But you know, Alan, you were talking about feeling like you're doing all this work, right? It's almost like you had the weight of the world on your shoulders. And in so many ways, when you care so much, you feel like you have to be Superman. And so, Dorian, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about Black Men Vote, and especially your Strength in Numbers campaign, because it takes all of us really to do this work. And I don't want anyone to feel like they are carrying the weight of the world on their backs, because if we move together, we can have such a great impact.
Absolutely. Well, the neat thing about Black Men Vote is that, you know, we believe that if Black men are not engaged in our democracy or in our elections, their voices are not being heard. And we know what a challenge that is. We know what that means. So what we've done with this very incredible initiative called Strength in Numbers, which we launched last year, is we're setting out to raise 1 million Black men by 2024. And that's a jarring number. It's an ambitious number, but it is the type of goal that we've set to really rally a movement around Black male voter registration this cycle. We believe that it's necessary. And while 2024 is a benchmark for us, regardless of where we are, we're going to keep going to register those Black men beyond the cycle. So here at Black Men Vote, my job is really to leverage those partnerships that we have with organizations across the country, both at the national level, like the organizations that you all are a part of, as well as in the communities where our organizers are working and have boots on the ground. Because to your point, Jerica, this is going to take a collective effort. It's not about keeping score. It's not about, making sure that credit is given, but it is about ensuring that collectively we're able to take on this effort. And while we are very much focused on Black men as an organization, when folks register to vote with Black Men Vote, we're oftentimes registering families of Black men. We're registering children. We're registering the football team right before practice. It's a really neat model that gives us the opportunity to meet folks again in their communities where they are. But it does take all of us. So through the Strength in Numbers initiative, we're continuing to work with organizers in states on the ground, but also we're continuing to have a very effective online voter registration push. Folks can go on blackmenvote.org to register, of course, but we're looking forward this cycle to introduce even more opportunities for folks to engage online so that those who want to take part in the Strength in Numbers initiative can also be ambassadors for the work that we're doing in getting 1 million Black men registered.
That's great. And you did something which I should have done earlier in this conversation. Can you both drop in the comment section the websites for your orgs? Because we do want to drive people to that. And I also want to encourage folks to go to reclaimyourvote.org. That's the National Urban League's website. You can check your voter registration and your status. You can also register yourself and help register other voters. So I think I'm so glad that we're in this space where we have the advent of technology and it's so much easier. There's so many opportunities for folks to connect and get registered. And we know the act of getting registered is important. We know it's even more important to show up to the polls. In the chat, Nick said, there is power in our votes and power in our voice. I want to expand on that a little bit, and I'll open this up to both of you. Either of you can start or jump in. Why is the right to vote so important? Why is it so important for us to maintain our access and power, especially in times like this? And I lift it up because today, on National Voter Registration Day, House Democrats reintroduced the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And look, it's an act that's near and dear to my heart. I had the opportunity to work under Congressman Lewis, but back then, when we were talking about the Voting Rights Act, it was one of those things that constantly was supported across the aisle by both Democrats, Republicans, Independents, etc. It wasn't controversial, but in this day and age, it's become controversial. And I guess I really struggle with understanding how access and protecting our democracy should be something that we are still debating and fighting over at this moment. And so I would love to hear from you all, whether it's talking about some of the issues that might be at play or the motivation, but really underscore why it's important for us to vote. I think people need to constantly be reminded of what's at stake.
I can go. So I would say it's two parts, right? So let me use the negative motivator. There is a reason why people don't want you to vote. Just that simple, right? There's a reason why. You can see it act out. You can go in Google and see many reasons why people don't want you to vote. But to the positive, when we move as a collective, we see real change, right? You can look over the last 20 years and you can look at how we have influenced government. You can see how we influence corporations. You can see the culture of the country changing. And I think that is directly connected to empowering and impacting Black and brown people, right? When you see people working as a collective, that is scary, right? Because you live in a society that's very much individualistic. So when you see a group of people who are just organizing and working collectively, there's a fear in that. And I think the fear is based out of really a lack of understanding, right? That people are not advocating to suppress or hurt someone else. They're really asking for a fair share and equity in this battle, right? Like, we are all Americans. We are all collectively working for a better democracy. If you let everyone participate in it, our democracy will be better, right? It's the fear that once you start hearing other voices, the voices of who've been oppressed, the voices who have been the dissent of this country and have really moved it further ahead than it would have been any other way. There's a fear in that. But for me, I lean into that as a strength of us, right? There's a fear because there's an acknowledgement that if you are collectively working together, you are powerful. And I'm into leaning into that power. because of many reasons, but one in particular is education, right? I want to see our young people to be more educated and stronger in who they are. I think when you have not just knowledge of history, but knowledge of who you are, it gives you a unique opportunity to go in this world and be a leader. And leaders are necessary because the world is very much built on the philosophy of an individual moving a collective. And I'm just open to how do we get more voices in that? Because the more voices, the more impact, right? Like we're not a monolithic culture. We are not just one philosophy that we all live by. So I am open to like building out the table so that we can all sit at that table and be a collective movement and all our different voices and the different perspectives of this world, right? Because I don't very much like sit on an island. I am a part of a community. I'm a part of a culture. I'm a part of my of the pillars of my community, and I want to make sure that I build the next pillars so that when whoever the next group of leaders come, that they're not coming to an empty table or they're not starting over. They're very much coming in with something prepared for them to build upon. I very much always call on my ancestors and say to them, you know, am I following the traditions and beliefs that we established for ourselves? And then how do I adhere to that? And one of those things is impacting and influencing those who I can, right? Starting at home. So I just have always prided myself on building out our community in any way and shape I could. So it's not just limiting myself to voting registration, but it's also like volunteering. It's also mentoring. It's also a multitude of ways in which we can get involved, but using this as a platform to really build on that instead of just standing by watching others fight. I want to be in the fight too. So I'm doing my part.
Yeah, and I'll stay in that vein of positivity. There's a lot of misconceptions about who Black people are. There's a lot of misconceptions about who Black men are. And one thing that we've learned and that we've seen is statistically, Black men are overrepresented demographically when it comes to involvement in their communities and involvement in their families. And this is the work that we do. We are our kids' sports teams coaches. We do, chair ministries in our churches. We also take care of our neighbors in many of the communities that we live in. So voting is just another extension of a way that we can be involved in this process. And because it is a system, there are rules and requirements that oftentimes show up as barriers to accessing what is something that we're already good at and that we're already conditioned to do. So in our work at Black Men Vote and the work that I think we're all doing to educate folks on how to become civically engaged, it's important for us to break down those barriers so that we can continue to extend the access, which is a very natural thing for us to do as leaders, for us to do as caretakers, and for us to do as folks who want to see, our communities change for the better around us. So that really is something that's resonated with me in this conversation around civic engagement, Black folks and Black men. It's interesting, there was an article that came out in the Washington Post in July that cited a 10% decrease in Black male voter turnout, which that was between 2018 and 2022. And we know that, in the midterm elections, there typically is a drop off in terms of participation, but the drop off was 10% for Black men and only 1.5% for our white counterparts, which to me speaks to what we also address, which is, some of that misinformation, the disinformation,
That's what I was
interest
going to ask you. What's
in
driving
dissent.
that?
Yeah, I think it's that interest in dissent. And we saw a number of different things and tactics that were used on the internet, on social media to dissuade people from participating in a process that, we're actually quite good at when we have the tools necessary to activate our votes. And, what happens beyond that for a lot of people is often, seen as a threat. So we've continued to really push back on these narratives about disinterest in voting because we are ready to go. We just need the tools to do it. And when we're fully resourced and having community conversations early on and not just before it's time for folks to pull the lever in the voting booth, we're able to not only have sustained engagement to shape the conversation of what's actually happening in these elections, but also in the outcomes, which are ultimately going to impact us here at home.
That's such a great point, and I just want to underscore again, service, really being indicative of our culture, right?
It is.
And you all listed so many ways that our community serves. And this is another way that we can engage in service. Um, NJ, so New Jersey, I'm assuming, BEC said it's important to remember that politicians listen to Black voters, not Black people, because it is voters who determine if a politician wins or loses an election. I think that was an interesting point, especially because we are just coming on the heels of National Black Voter Day. And I will say, when we're talking about Black people, we're talking about brown people and others from marginalized communities. I will say that we can be very vocal about what's happening and about experiences and raising our voices on issues. But it is important that we take the protests um, and make sure that we turn it into policy. And by voting, that's how we ensure that happens. So I do want to underscore the importance of us not just being an engaged Black community, but a community filled with dependable, committed Black voters that show up time and time again, and that we continue to expand the base. One of the other themes I really want to cover, and really, Alan, you talked about it as something that was a motivating factor for you, is our young people and the youth vote. And so I would love to hear from you all about um, increasing youth engagement. I think sometimes there is a misnomer out there that young people are apathetic and that they don't care. But I think if we look at George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, that whole social justice uprising we saw in 2020, or if we look at March for Our Lives and the movement around combating gun violence and taking guns off of our streets, young people have really been the leaders of that work. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I also want you to chime in on civic education, because quite frankly, and shout out to Lorenzo Vicente, who leads our civic education work here at the National Urban League. When we were on the ground in 2022 and meeting with young people, there was a disconnect, and I think gaps in the understanding of how our electoral process works, how our political process works. I know so many of us grew up on Schoolhouse Rock, but I think we have failed our communities in some ways, officials in general. The disinvestment in civic education is quite problematic, and there's more work that we need to do. So I will shoot it to you, Dorian, and then to Alan to chime in, but love to hear your thoughts on youth engagement and civic education.
Yeah, well, I started off this work as a youth organizer on my college campus, organizing around issues of environmental justice and a number of other kind of issues that folks may deem progressive at the time. But it was it was such an important time for me and space for me to be able to engage there on the campus of Howard University, where so many of these movement spaces have existed for decades. When we look at this election cycle, this kind of current political landscape, we do need a Schoolhouse Rock 2.0. And I don't know if we need to get Ice Spice on the phone to come up with, some new lyrics to educate our folks on what the process is. But, and it's critical for us to do that. And it's all about ingraining this work in the culture and making it accessible. We are organizing voters at music festivals this year. We're going to be at the HBCU homecomings, but we're also meeting folks, in the message boards, the chat rooms, the blog sites, and making sure that, the online kind of geography is also a part of that, because there is a gap in civic education and engagement that we have to acknowledge. And those are the spaces where we've really got to leverage our resources and target. So I think when we look at young people, I had the pleasure of seeing an early screening of the new Bayard Rustin movie, where, you know, the March on Washington, we'll remember, was organized by young people. They were high schoolers. They were, you know, college-age students. And historically, we know that social movements are driven by young people. They have the reins on the culture, and we've got to sometimes get out of our own way to give them space to show up and tell us how it is that they want to be led, how they want to be engaged, and how they want to be treated. So maybe it's TikTok, maybe it's Ice Spice. We're knocking on every door and throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, because there's a lot that we can learn from young people as organizers in this space. And so much of that oftentimes is giving them the clipboard, is giving them the pens, giving them the talking points and the messages that they'll know how to put their own spin on, in order to engage their peers. So relational organizing is at the core of what we've been up to, and young people have a really unique opportunity to drive that work and be even more effective than we may believe.
And I just want to echo.
I just want to say, I had to chime in. Make sure you go to that Spellhouse homecoming. I know you're a Bison, and Bisons are like lighting up in this comment section, but don't leave us out, okay?
HBCU love.
Yes.
Don't forget Morgan. Don't forget Morgan.
Okay. I love it. Look, we're representing all on this IG Live today. I'm sorry to cut you off, though. Jump in, Alan.
No, I just actually was just going to agree with everything Dorian said. I think he hit it nail on the head. Like, it is very much empower young people, right? Think back to when you were a young person talking to your elders and what your elders had shared in you. There is wisdom that we can share in them, but it's also give them the space to speak in their language. Give them the tools so that they can go out there and do it their way, because they know what's best for them. So I am a advocate for young people. I am very much like, what do you need and how can I be of service to you? And then I will also add to that something that I'm seeing in Florida, where the churches are really taking on the role of being the historians and the educators of our community. And I think that is where we're best at, right? Is not to lock ourselves into these formal rooms and say these are the only ways in which we can educate and influence, but to really take it directly to the community and directly to our young people and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. Here's some things I know can help you. As a former history teacher, I always felt the best connection was reality to history, right? That's where you are at that moment and how that relate to where we were. So I always would say, though, I talk to a lot of elders and they always say we had died for this right to vote. I want us to always be reminded that we are still dying for this right to vote, that we are still fighting for this right to vote, that we are still here doing the battle of our ancestors. So connect them back to who they are and let them remember that our history didn't begin at slavery, that our greatness is not what we were defined in the moment, but that we are always striving for that, and empower them. I'm a huge proponent of empowering, because the reality is that they are taking the lead on this work, that they will become the ancestors, that they will be the historians of their community. And the best thing that we can do is give them the tools to do that. And then after you give them the tools, get out their way so they can go and be great, because I'm seeing it every day. Young people who are justice aligned or may have been in the system for whatever reason are coming out and changing the world because they understand the impact of being in that institution. And I'm here to say, wherever you are, you have the ability to change the world. Don't feel like, oh, I'm watching this Instagram, I'm not on it, I can't do anything. You absolutely can do something. You absolutely have a role and a purpose in change. And it can be as small as just being an influence to your friends. And it can be as large as being a pillar within your community. But whatever it is, you have that capability and that skill. And I just want to lean into young people knowing that I believe, that we believe, and that the ancestors who came before us believe in them. So they're not fighting this battle alone. They're fighting this battle for greatness and for the rest of us who believe in them.
Well, look, Alan, I didn't think I was going to get a sermon on a Tuesday, but you really just, you brought the fire there. And thank you so much for your motivating words. And history is so important, especially when we know it is under attack in this country. There will be a governor that will remain nameless on this IG Live, but it's so important that we don't rely on others and that we make sure that we are teaching it. but recognize, as you said, that our young people are living it and they're making it. And one of the things I do hope to do here at the National Urban League, we have a Voting in Jail project. There's so much public education that we need to invest in and recognize that our brothers and sisters behind the wall in certain jurisdictions have and have rights and access to the ballot box. And we don't, we don't push it enough. And we need to make sure they know that, and that we create space to make sure they get the resources in to actually be able to execute on that. And so that's what I hope we concentrate on. All these organizations, nonpartisan. We've seen a huge increase in voter turnout in recent years, but I know our numbers could be even higher if we really reach not just those that are formally incarcerated, but those who have been detained, those who are incarcerated right now, wanting them to know how powerful their voice is, their vote is. And even if they're in a jurisdiction where the law is not on their side, they have the ability to influence others and be an advocate because they have family, they have friends, they have relatives, communities, folks that are behind the walls that are supportive of them. They need to be encouraging folks to lift up progressive elected officials or those who are running that are actually touting criminal justice reform, changing justice systems, focusing on restorative justice, right? And so we have the opportunity to impact so much. I will say we could have this conversation and we will continue this conversation because there's just so much at play and so much on the table. But I want to make sure that we leave and give folks some action steps. And so on this National Voter Registration Day, we still have a couple hours left. And we also have to look, there's upcoming elections and we know how important it is for people to plan ahead and make their voting plan. And so I'd love each of you to chime in on that and just give us your kind of parting words, last words of wisdom for tonight's conversation, but we know there will be more to come. Alan, we'll start with you, and Dorian, you want to close us out?
I'll close this out. I don't know if I can preach like Alan did, but
No, you're fine. I just want to say,
you're very
please,
gifted, Dorian. I didn't read your whole bio, but we know you are a special person, and we love to hear what both of you have to say.
and I just want to reiterate, I love the movement that you're doing because you're focusing on Black men, because at the end of the day, we are the household and we are the model for our children. So to get us to get active and involved is important because we model that to our children. So I appreciate that a lot. I would just recommend, today is National Voter Registration Day. Please check our website out. Go to nationalvoterregistrationday.org, register to vote. Get involved in your community, look at our map, see some of the events that occurred in your community. And even if you missed out on today, tomorrow is a new day to get involved. There's always a place at the table. So anywhere you are, just please register to vote, get people active in voting, and then start influencing and educating others on the impact of voting. That's all I would ask.
And I'll jump in and echo some of those same sentiments, Alan, and just encourage folks, particularly those who are motivated or excited about the prospect of 1 million Black men being registered, which we will get to. Check out blackmenvote.org online. You can also follow us on Instagram at blackmenvoteofficial. It's National Voter Registration Day, but it's also the Congressional Black Caucus, ALC in DC. We'll be having an event on Friday. So check out our Instagram. We'd love to have you all join us for that event where we're going beyond party lines and having additional conversations about, our issues, what's motivating us to turn out and how we can do that more effectively this cycle. So stay plugged in. Where you don't find Black Men Vote, we will certainly find you. But just appreciate you, Jerica, Alan, and team for pulling us together on this day in particular to have this conversation at such a critical time.
Well, Alan, Dorian, thank you so much for your leadership in this space. It's so needed. And thank you for bringing that We Got Us energy on this IG Live tonight. I'm loving it. And that's what we need to continue to bring to our communities and to our polls going forward. Um, Thanks to everyone who's joined us for tonight's conversation. Thanks to all of you who will watch us on YouTube or watch reruns of this later. Just remember how important it is to reclaim your vote. We have to do it over and over and over again. We have to create this culture of civic engagement. It's how we reclaim our voice, and it's how we reclaim and hold on and maintain our power. So with that, thank you all for joining us. And remember, the time for justice is always now. Take care, everyone.
Ashe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.